light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. Today I just wanted to offer some thoughts and reflections on opposing deplorable conduct without devaluing people. In some ways, for those who value biblical sources, I know my viewing audience includes people of all different belief systems and some who claim no particular belief system. In some ways it corresponds to that very, very challenging truism spoken by, or attributed to Jesus, of love your enemies. It seems to me that in order to resolve a lot of different interpersonal conflicts, the first thing we have to do is begin to see each other as real people, not as objects, not as an embodiment of the category enemy or an embodiment of the category oppressor, but instead that this is a multidimensional person who is struggling with various challenges and sometimes getting it right and sometimes getting it wrong, like most of us. That being the case, it's important to recognize that there is a multidimensional person involved, at the heart of the matter, but that the action itself is a momentary movement in time. It is much, much smaller than a multidimensional person. And we can oppose those small sorts of really, really nasty things, really bad things, as actions that could be done by a large number of people, in some cases by anyone. The reason I think some of us don't do certain actions is because we don't have the same preceding experiences that that person has. It's kind of like the old adage, there but for the grace of God go I. That if my story were the same as someone else's story, my response, my thoughts, my negative actions even, might be the same as those of that person. We have to love the person enough to give them an opportunity to do the right thing, as well as giving them the support to heal from whatever negative or nasty or wounding things they have experienced. We can oppose the action. We can say, that is not the right action, but that does not mean that I'm condemning you as a person. You do a wide variety of different things. Some of them I like, some of them I don't. But whether I like or dislike your actions, you're still a valuable person simply because you are a multidimensional person with all sorts of unexplored potential. There are wonderful things that you could do if you had the resources and the nurturing experiences to move in that direction. In a similar way, there are bad choices that get made because of negative experiences that people have had. There are people who grow up in dysfunctional homes who embody the dysfunctions they witnessed throughout childhood. There are adults who lose something in a way that is really unjust and fundamentally wrong, and everybody would agree it's wrong. But we don't have a judicial or a law enforcement system that manages to make justice happen 100% of the time. One of the problems of the American judicial system is that it's not so much a question of what's true, but rather a question of what you can prove in a court of law, according to very specific and complicated procedures. So such that we know that occasionally there are people who are innocent who get convicted as if they were guilty, simply because they don't have the evidence or the proof to make that truth obvious to everyone in the room, in whatever particular courtroom or situation. There are times where I run into a negative reaction from someone and I know it didn't have anything to do with me, but I wasn't there to witness what happened to them before. So I may be getting the grumpy attitude that's a result of them dealing with a really rude, bad customer 10 minutes before. Well, that customer is long gone from the store, but this person, a cashier maybe at a store, is still trying to heal from being verbally abused by that person. But they don't have the luxury of stepping out from behind the cash register and going back to a quiet room someplace and focusing on healing from that verbal abuse so that they don't pass along that brokenness to the next person they meet. The conduct of numerous people is absolutely deplorable. It doesn't mean that that is the only conduct of which they are capable. There will be times when people are nice to them and they pass along the blessing. I was watching a video on the internet yesterday where someone had to music without any words, had created this illustration of how being kind to each other, being kind to others, can set off like a row of dominoes, a cascading effect. There was a construction worker at the beginning of the video who helped a young man who had fallen down because he ran into something on his skateboard, and he helped the young man up and made sure he was okay. And so the young man walked on, and about 20 feet later saw an elderly woman trying to carry 2 big bags of groceries, and she was having trouble getting them situated so that she could cross the street effectively. So he carries a bag of groceries across the street, and they smile at each other and bid goodbye, and still remaining strangers to each other. The elderly woman walks a few feet and sees a younger woman digging in her purse for coin for the meter, for the parking meter, and pulls a little change out of her pocket and says, "Here, don't worry about it," and without saying anything, hands her the meter money so she doesn't have to keep digging in her purse. That woman in turn notices someone who dropped something and quickly grabs it and returns it to them. They didn't realize they dropped some important paper or something. And one after another, the being kind to total strangers, just doing real little things to help out, passes through about 3 or 4 more people, finally back to a waitress at a sidewalk cafe who is clearing the tables and has just gotten this incredible tip, but the person disappeared so quickly she couldn't give any change. And so she's feeling blessed that someone was kind to her, and looks over and grabs a glass of water from the table and runs out to the curb to give water to this construction worker who is just sweating profusely in the fierce heat doing his job. And of course it's the same construction worker who started this whole chain of events. As one act of kindness produced another, and it came back around. I don't know that it's always quite that clear or quite that obvious, but the other thing to remember is that none of the people in that chain of events knew about the other people. Each one of them only dealt with 2 people, the one who was kind to them and the one to whom they were kind. But it keeps going around. So when something bad happens, that's the corollary to that we don't have to reflect back as if the bad action, as if the deplorable conduct were in fact the definition of the person. We recognize that there are good people who occasionally do bad things. We don't want to encourage them to do more bad things, though, so we look for ways, ideally, we look for ways to encourage them to ignore the bad thing that just happened, whether it was wiping out on the skateboard or struggling with the groceries and being angry because it was too much to carry, and why can't I have a cart like everyone else does that I can pull along behind me? All sorts of different things that could occupy each person's thoughts and keep them from noticing or passing along the act of kindness. Those are the actions. They're simply events in time. The people are separate from their actions. The problem is each of them only saw the other people for one brief moment, very brief moment. And it would have been easy to say or to think, inaccurate, but easy to think that action fully defined and described that person. That because this person did one kind thing, that must mean that they only do kind things all the time. None of us do only kind things all the time. None of us do only bad things all the time. Having recognized this dynamic going on all around us, even when we're not thinking about it, the challenge comes back to how do we oppose that deplorable conduct in ways that keep it from passing any further? And how do we take a bad incident and shift it in a positive direction? How do we recognize, well, even obvious things like discrimination or racism when they happen, and prevent them from going any further without making the perpetrator of the moment, the person who did the action, who may or may not have intended it? Maybe the environment they grew up in, which they were raised, maybe they were taught to see the world in that way, to think of certain classes of people as less than them somehow. Maybe they're simply demonstrating the negative behavior that was modeled for them throughout childhood. Even if that's the case, how do we oppose that dynamic, that action, how do we begin to tell a family where there have been generations of domestic violence, for example, that violence is not necessary to resolving interpersonal conflicts, and stop that cycle of violence from going any further? To say that, yes, maybe my grandparents beat my parents and my parents beat me, I'm going to be the one to say, no, the cycle stops here. And I will participate in support groups, I'll read books, I'll get counseling, I'll do whatever I need to so that I don't carry this deplorable behavior any further. Because ultimately it's not about me, and it's not about my parents, it's not about my grandparents, it's about the action itself that needs to be stopped. It's not the people that need to be stopped, it's the action. And there are a lot of creative ways that we can also intervene in those situations to keep actions from repeating. If someone is feeling really, really stressed about something, to take the initiative to step in and explain the situation so that it is not stressful, or to reassure them that what they think might happen won't, and here's why. A lot of times, I think the reason people are getting upset and engaging in deplorable conduct and doing bad things is because they don't see the larger picture. They don't know what resources are available to them. They don't know that there is any other way to deal with that particular problem. Growing up in a farming region, I would say that most of the people all around me had no idea what sort of training they could have given their dogs to make them highly trained dogs that would respond to vocal commands. A dog, in my childhood understanding, was simply the family pet who barked occasionally, got fed twice a day, and if we let them run loose, they'd get into all sorts of trouble. So frequently they were chained up outside somewhere. And that was the normal life for dogs on the farm. For certain more contemporary perspectives, I've heard that described as a very cruel way to treat a dog. I don't know that we thought we were being cruel, and I don't know that the dog expected anything different. And so the word cruel really didn't fit into the conversation. Part of the problem, though, I think, looking back, was our ignorance about what sort of training the dog would respond. The very notion of having a dog that lived inside the house never entered my life until I was in my teenage years. And for someone to say that, no, the dog can live inside the house and be trained not to make messes, not to chew on things they're not supposed to, not to knock things over all the time, not to put its feet up on the table, all sorts of things. I mean, there's so many different things you can train dogs to do. No one had ever suggested that you could take a farm dog and train them to behave that way. In retrospect, I don't see any reason you couldn't, but no one had ever even suggested it. There is within each of us a kind of wisdom for dealing with negative behaviors. Ways of saying, if someone is threatening oppressive violence, sometimes, like dogs who are on the verge of fighting, all you have to do is distract them for a moment and they forget what it was they were about to fight about. If you create, a couple minutes of distraction or a different problem, that shifts the focus. If you see people arguing on the street and you bump into them and drop a bag of groceries or something, it goes all over the sidewalk, oh dear. If it's things that aren't going to break or get damaged anyway, a bag of canned goods or something, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to bump you, whatever. suddenly everyone is trying to deal with spilled groceries. And by the time we get done dealing with that, and maybe throwing in some comment about, I really need to get home so quick because someone's going to be calling, and it creates a distraction that throws the earlier potential conflict completely off track. And 2 minutes later, they may forget what it was they were even talking about. Or there may be some other resolution that you see to a situation that the person involved may not have the resources to see, may not know to see. There was a particular metaphysical fair I was at once where I was talking with different people, and there was a brief time between conversations where about 20 or 30 feet away I heard a child crying. And of course I'm dressed as in my ritual garb, and I just went over, and it was a little girl in a stroller who was just really upset about wanting something, but it wasn't really clear what she wanted. And so I just kind of kneeled down, 2 or 3 feet from the stroller, and just said, "Hi, I'm Sister Who. What's the problem?" And of course, seeing this person in costume, she just immediately went silent and stared at me like she really didn't know what to do, didn't know what to think, didn't know what to say. And so then I tried to encourage friendly sorts of conversation. I mean, I don't know that she could even talk yet. She was a very young child, but the fact that I was talking to her and recognizing her as a person, and oh, are you having a really hard day? There's lots of beautiful stuff here to see. And that kind of attention, I think she must have forgot what it was she was crying about, because she never did start crying again for the rest of the day, as far as I know. Mother, of course, was very happy that this child was entertained for a moment, I guess you could say, but it wasn't exactly entertainment, but it was a sort of interactive distraction that allowed a tense situation to relax and to de-escalate. The thing to remember about opposing deplorable conduct is that there are ways to do it that also create opportunity for something better. It's not just that we go around saying don't do this and don't do that and don't do whatever. It's saying, instead of that, how about this? And instead of that, how about this? And instead of that, I'll help you do this if you like. By being willing to engage as a whole person, we also extend to the other person the opportunity to make a new friend, and to feel that the world actually does notice whether they're struggling and does care whether or not they're able to deal with their challenges. So many of us go through life struggling to resolve challenges and to deal with adversity and to stand against dysfunctional behavior in ourselves and in our families, feeling many times as if we're fighting the battle all alone, because everyone else each other person is fighting his or her own battles as well. The problem is that this kind of becomes a divide and conquer sort of strategy in a negative direction, that by giving each of us some distraction or challenge or difficulty to deal with, we forget about banding together, and that as a group we could solve the problems of each member of the group as a group, bringing the resources and the strength and the mutual encouragement of the group to each challenge, so that we are still solving 8 different challenges with 8 different people, but it's 8 people against one challenge 8 times instead of one person against one challenge. It's in some ways remembering how to be a village again, how to be an extended family to each other, and to remember, and in that sense to remind each other, I see you doing this now and I'm very disturbed by that, but I've seen you do other things before, or I know that you can do other things. To remind that person directly and verbally, I see you doing this now and it disappoints me, but I know that's not the only thing you've ever done. There must be other situations similar to this that you handle in other ways. What are some of the other ways you've handled this sort of challenge? And what was present that time that allowed you to handle it that is missing this time? Maybe I can help you find the missing ingredient so that you can deal with this challenge in this context. there are solutions that I've heard of working in other people's lives that they want to present as the solution for everyone. And it would be wonderful if it worked that way, but it frequently doesn't. What we often fail to consider are the resources and the tools and the people, the timing, if you will, even, that makes the solution work in that specific context. That if we change the context and we don't have the same resources available, and then expect the particular solution or the particular strategy to work just the way it did last time, we're only fooling ourselves. Considering the amount of variance that these dynamics can take on within life experience, it makes sense that we need to go forward as a group, as a family, supporting each other and listening to each other, so that when someone says, this is what I need and this is what it needs in order to be that we can begin looking, or we may be able to suggest effective substitutes. I recall one particular episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation in which they encountered a new unfamiliar species that was only able to communicate through metaphor. And it was essentially attempting to feed off of the Star Trek Enterprise's power supplies and such, and it was having a negative effect on the ship. And they realized that it was metaphorical language that was going between them, and they didn't want to turn it into an adversarial situation of saying, it's either us or you can't take this from us, we'd rather see you die than to have us die. Instead, they were able to find a metaphor and find a way to communicate the metaphor, to simply say, I know of a different source where you can get the energy you need. I know of a different way, a different route, a different path to satisfying this need. And thankfully they were able to convince this unfamiliar species to trust them long enough to find out whether in fact they did have a different way of providing the energy that they needed. And it turns out, of course, that they did. And within the metaphorical presentation, the alien species then looked at them and said, it really does work. And they witnessed the rebirth, I guess, of a new species, even though they really didn't understand what was going on. They were able to get through the situation once they found a symbolic way of communicating, so that it was a win-win situation. It seems to me a lot of times what stands between a win-lose situation and a win-win situation is just a little bit of time and consideration, a little bit of open-mindedness and willingness to work together. Deplorable conduct and deplorable behavior, hurtful actions, dysfunctional relational dynamics will probably be with the human race for a very long time to come. We have a long ways to go before we get all that ironed out. And that really doesn't matter as long as we're willing to communicate and work with each other along the way, and as long as we keep our expectations appropriate. That when somebody does something that is simply bad behavior, that there's to consider that there's a reason they did it that way, and to find out what that reason is, and to see if there are in fact viable alternatives that our experience or somebody else's experience or some professional's insight could recommend. That by involving these other voices, other perspectives, other bits of information, other portals to understanding, if you will. I mean, each of us is a portal to understanding. If someone is in a problematic situation and they don't have a necessary or an essential portal to understanding, if they don't have the information they need to know how to deal with it, the problem is not going away. Whatever the problem is, it will demand some sort of response. And if it can't find a good response, it will settle for a bad one. That needs don't disappear just because we don't have the means and the resources to satisfy them. They insist on being satisfied, and if they cannot be satisfied in a legitimate way, they will demand to be satisfied in an illegitimate way. most hopeful ingredient in those challenging, disturbing, distressing situations, I suggest, is each other. Because within each of us is a whole different library of resources and insights and strategies that of which we will be completely unaware unless we involve ourselves in conversation and dialogue and are willing to be open about the stories and the experiences and the memories that we have. You don't know all of my memories and I don't know all of yours, but it's quite possible that each of us holds the memories and the strategies and the methods within our minds that are absolutely essential to someone else's current challenge. If we give them that opportunity to meet their need with our strategy, if they think it fits them, quite possibly we'll just make a new friend. And we'll both be that much better off for dealing with whatever else is ahead. In any case, I hope the comments of the last half hour have been helpful to you. Thank you very much for watching.